and look at that procedure, which also means that there are requirements for indicating that you have correctly read through it and are using it like you should. And so this is where we start getting into placekeeping, and how you placekeep on a procedure is actually something that is in itself proceduralized and required for you to understand and use as part of your good conduct of ops. So one of the things that will be required, for example, the INL, their placekeeping methodology, is that you will read the action step and you will draw a circle next to that step. Then the person you are reading the procedure to will perform that step, and you will put a line or a check mark in the circle. So that says you read it, they understood it and performed it, and you have now checked off that step on the procedure. So there's a lot of depth to the skills we're going to gain in using procedures. A little bit about that human performance and procedure use. So these are the things that you need to do or not do in a general sense to use a procedure correctly. Before you ever start using one, verify that it's the correct revision. You're going to check the date and make sure that it's been approved, that the correct signatures are on that procedure that says, yes, this is the one that's correct. At the beginning of a procedure, there's going to be a section that talks about prerequisites, limits, precautions, and initial conditions. These are things that have to be evaluated before you start work. So before the action steps in the procedure portion where you actually do the work, verify that everything that says doing this procedure for this work is valid is actually met. So those prerequisites, those limits, precautions, initial conditions. Shall be followed as written without deviating from the original intent and purpose. Sometimes procedures are not written well. Sometimes the person who wrote them is not necessarily an operator and is not able to write it very well so that in the field you can follow it well. In that case, there's going to be a process for editing those procedures. But if you come to a section where obviously word for word how it was written deviates from the intent and purpose, that wouldn't be it wouldn't be appropriate to follow word for word if it clearly deviates from the intent and purpose of the procedure. So you have to understand that this is a whole body, and just because there might be an awkward sentence, you have to understand the intent and purpose of the procedure. Once you're in a procedure, do not deviate from the sequence of steps unless you're approved by some sort of supervisor or management. And that process of getting approved to deviate should be formalized. They should write in what they're having you do and why. It can't just be your boss said so. Operators are supposed to, be responsible for these systems that are in their purview. And one of the things that's extremely important in the nuclear industry is a questioning attitude. And so if the procedure is confusing or incorrect and someone tells you to do something else, you should immediately question, is this the right way to make this change to the procedure? Is this the right way to get this work done? Or do we need to pause, have a work pause and get the correct process done so that we know we're authorized to do this work? Don't NA any step unless it's approved. Sometimes in the procedures, it will tell you, hey, you don't have to do this step if this condition is met, and then you can NA it because it says so in the procedure, but you can't just decide a step is NA, is not applicable. Okay, if you discover that the procedure is incorrect, stop the task, contact a supervisor. It is extremely important that you have confidence in the procedures that you're given to use, which is why it's very important that Operators participate in procedure writing and procedure testing. But if you do not have confidence that the procedure is telling you to do the correct thing, stop. Get someone else involved, get authorization to continue with that procedure or use a different one. Be responsible for protecting that equipment. Okay? If at the end of a procedure that you believe was correct and you did correct, the desired or anticipated results are not achieved, you also need to stop. Don't proceed, don't sign off. Contact a supervisor and find out why that system is either not in its correct format, why the procedure didn't work, or why these unexpected results are found. Okay? Talked about placekeeping and how we do it. This reduces the probability of omitting or duplicating action steps. And so that's why we do it. Sometimes you actually have to initial your placekeeping to verify that you actually did it. And sometimes there's signatures. But like I said, the most common is just that checkoff box. Okay. Certain written responses are required at various action steps. If independent verification, inspection, or data recording is required, there will be a place for someone to sign or initial. Okay. So independent verification is a very specific process, and it has to be done correctly to count. And at times, there are actually regulations that require things to be independently verified. It's really important that you understand. When you require independent verification, someone is verifying independent of the original operator that the task was done correctly. So that means that you, as the original operator, you're going to do it, you're going to sign that you're at that step, and oftentimes you're going to leave the area. Then someone else is going to come in completely independent, and they're going to verify that the lineup matches what it should be at that step, or that the data has been recorded. Whatever they're verifying, they're going to actually check it. And a lot of times the independent is where people kind of have difficulty is that they'll show someone what they did, but that's not them independently checking it, right? And then of course, sign off if there are lines for verification, notification, or inspection signatures. You have to get that sign off by someone other than the original user. And sometimes it requires the checker or verifier to do something specific to actually meet that verification requirement. Hold points. This is, you go through action steps and then they basically tell you to stop here and wait for an inspection. A lot of times this involves quality assurance coming to ensure that something is done a certain way. Health physics coming to check dose before you proceed. Engineering coming to verify condition or sign off on some part of the procedure, or various other inspectors. Sometimes other health and safety issues require other subject matter experts to come be involved. This hold point essentially allows operators to pause what they're doing and involve the correct subject matter expert to make sure that the procedure is performed correctly. Okay. Operators, you're responsible to not assume that a procedure is well written and accurate. Review it before you start. Participate in a meaningful pre-job brief, and be willing to stop and ask questions. Review unfamiliar procedures before performing a task. Make sure you understand what's in the procedure before you start the work. Critical steps are specific actions that are called out in a procedure as being of special importance. You should know and understand where these are in advance before you perform a procedure. Your first read through the procedure should never be at the start of the actual work activity. And a lot of times you're going to have this covered by doing on-the-job training, where you will be observing someone else perform procedures, especially those with very important critical steps. But be aware that you shouldn't first be exposed to your procedure as you start the work. Don't believe that any operator worth their salt doesn't need a procedure. Okay. This attitude is just not really compatible with the nuclear safety culture that the nuclear industry is trying to cultivate. Procedures are an important part of formal conduct of operations. They are the system the industry has chosen to ensure that systems are controlled and error is reduced. And so you need to buy into the fact that how you use procedures is important, and it is not at all a reflection of your knowledge or skill that you continue to correctly use a procedure, even for a task that you might be extremely familiar with. And at the same time, despite that skill or experience with a task, you're still going to rigorously and correctly follow a procedure. So the attitude that a procedure isn't needed is not really the attitude you want to cultivate to be a successful nuclear operator. Make sure that any interpretation meets the intent of the procedure. And never use a procedure maliciously, knowing it has flaws. It can be very frustrating when there's bad procedures, and it may be a procedure you use a lot, but ultimately is not one that is very high on the list of safety-related processes. And so it might get kicked to the bottom of the pile, and it might take a really long time for the process to improve procedures occurs. But you still have a responsibility to use that procedure so that it meets its intent, and not try to maliciously demonstrate that it hasn't been fixed and it has flaws. Use the process and understand that that can at times be frustrating. You still have a responsibility to use that procedure correctly. And then you do have a responsibility for submitting feedback. Talk about the usability, talk about the technical accuracy, make sure that the people who are writing procedures have a chance to improve. Even though most facilities try not to have this occur, occasionally you have people who are writing procedures who have never been operators, and sometimes have never even been out to that particular facility. And it can make it so that you get procedures that are very difficult to use. Helping that person become a better procedure writer only helps you be a better operator, because then you have less frustration from bad procedures, and your procedures are a better tool overall. Asking questions, don't engage in blind compliance. So understand its purpose. Don't just follow a list of instructions that you don't comprehend. Okay. Never skip steps, and don't sign off a step as completed before it is complete. You may be in the process of getting ready to do it, but don't sign it until it's actually done. Again, establish those initial conditions prior to commencing the work activity. Make sure you understand those precautions and list of prerequisites at the beginning of the procedure. Use the correct version. Use placekeeping. Where you're required to sign or initial, do that. And don't use ditto marks in your procedures, in your logbooks, in your operator round sheets. Fill out each section. It is not appropriate conduct of ops to just use ditto marks. You need to show that you're recording the data for each section as required at the time you did that section. Any questions on that?
I kind of have one. So when we were talking about the malicious intent of using them when you know there's issues in a procedure, you said that we're not also supposed to interpret it. So are we supposed to interpret when it would be malicious to do it improperly?
So you're not supposed to interpret it as far as trying to decide what this particular step meant if it's not correct. You are supposed to understand the intent of the procedure. So for example, if a procedure is, let's say it's a maintenance procedure, and it states in the initial conditions that you need to ensure that this pump flow has been diverted so you can isolate the pump in order to run this maintenance activity. But then in the steps, you see that the actual step-by-step actions do not end up isolating that pump. Your interpretation will say, hey, the intent was to isolate this pump. These steps do not do that. Obviously, this pump is incorrect. This procedure is incorrect, right? You're not going to go make a choice and say, I'm going to go ahead and move this valve because I know it will isolate the pump without getting someone to authorize that, right? Because it's not in the procedure. But you're also not going to maliciously go try and do the pump maintenance when it hasn't been correctly isolated, even though you followed the steps in the procedure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a combination of understanding that procedures are supposed to essentially remove choice. But if it's obvious that the intent of the procedure isn't being met, you do need to say, hey, this interpretation says this should be occurring and it's not. I need to stop and get someone else involved because the procedure I've been given to do this work control is not correct. So, as a quick review, can you guys list the operator responsibilities that we just talked about for procedure use without pulling the slides back up? There were 16, so I think there should be enough for one from each of you.
Would one of them be to like help actually write the procedures?
So we talked about actually writing the data in the procedure, right? Don't use the ditto marks. Is that what you were saying?
No, no, it wasn't.
Oh, well, that's one. We'll give you credit for that one.
Make sure you read and understand the whole procedure before you're even going in and doing it.
Yes. What's another one?
Don't assume it's worded and accurate.
Don't assume. Yep.
Don't skip steps.
Don't skip steps. Who else has one? What about Chase? Can you recall one?
Sorry, it cut out for a minute there. What'd you say?
Can you list one of the operator responsibilities we just talked about?
Oh, we already got assume. Absolutely, like, don't modify any of it or skip any steps without proper authorization.
Exactly. Yep. Don't skip steps.
Is
Zach? Oh, go ahead, Trevor.
is like sign-offs part of the steps?
Yep. Yep. What about sign-offs?
You just got to have like responses to all of the steps that you've done, basically.
Yep. Yep. And so don't sign off in advance. Zach, you have one you remember?
I answered one.
Oh, you answered one?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Then someone else who's in class. Sorry, it's hard for me to connect voices with people from the classroom.
Assuming that the procedure might not be written properly.
Correct. So do not assume it's well written and accurate. Be questioning. Doug, do you have one?
I was just going to say what Porter did. Don't assume.
Okay, don't assume. Kingston? or Karina? Did everybody who's in the classroom say one? I don't think I heard Darren's voice. Remember Darren?
Know and understand critical steps.
Yep. Okay. Review unfamiliar procedures before performing a task. Don't fall prey to the attitude that operators don't need procedures. Rigorously follow them. Never use a procedure maliciously. Participate in feedback. Use the correct revision of a procedure. And then the ones we already talked about. So, based on our discussion, does anybody think that they did a pretty good job with their quick little procedure they wrote? Or do you guys think that you created a difficult procedure for people to follow? What were your guys' thoughts? Yours was okay, Brooke?
Well, I was trying to make it pretty in depth, so I only got like halfway through it. But I'm not, every time I've done one of these things, I always just forget things, just always.
Yeah, it is hard to write them. What about someone else? What'd you guys?
I thought mine was kind of lacking in a lot of it because I put the brushing teeth and I didn't put like which bathroom to go and like how much water and stuff to use. So
Yeah,
I felt like it would have been a little hard to follow.
Yeah. Forgetting how specific you need to be is pretty common, which also then makes it a lot easier for you as an operator to know when you need to give that feedback to procedure writers, what has to be in that procedure so that it is correct. Anybody in the classroom? What do you guys think of your procedures?
Mine was kind
I
of
feel
same.
like,
Annoying.
1 second,
my
Chase.
bad.
Let's let the classroom go and then we'll hear from you.
Alright.
Yeah, mine was the same as Brooks, more or less.
Okay. All right, Chase, what do you think?
I'm pretty sure with this, I could confidently say all of you would be able to feed my dogs.
Okay, good. All right, guys, that is it for today. I do have to isolate next week. The ISU Health Center is counting it as 2 weeks from when my husband tried to start self-isolating here at the house, which is slightly different than what my doctor told me, but that's all right. Christy has also now been exposed and she is just starting her isolation. So I'm going to try and create a plan for the lab on Tuesday. So be watching your email for instructions and we'll see what we can come up with. But Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week, we'll still have class on Zoom. And then I plan to be back in the classroom. So Monday.
Mackenzie,
Yes.
I did the simulated JCL lab. Where do you want me to put the materials back since I can't give it to Christy?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Oh, there's a little basket outside my office. You can just stick it in there and I'll grab it when I can come back.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. Have a good weekend, guys.
You do.
Thank you.